Hi everyone, I'm Carl Shepherd, the Data Jiu-Jitsu guy, and in this video, I'm going to talk to you about a relatively new concept called the data mesh. There's currently a lot of hype around this topic, and it's evoking some really strong emotions in some people on both sides of the fence. I'm going to start by saying that I believe that the data lakehouse is still the best approach to data management, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend building a data mesh in most circumstances, but I do believe there's some really excellent concepts that could potentially be used to improve the existing data landscape. I'm going to keep this video as simple as possible, but if you're unfamiliar with other data concepts such as data warehouses, data lakes, and lakehouses, I think you may find this difficult to follow. I've created a video series on the data analytics journey where I go through these particular topics. So it might be worth, if you're not familiar with them, then pausing this video now, going back and watching those first and returning back here.
So the agenda for today, I'm going to take you through what a data mesh actually is, and we'll spend most of our time in this particular area because it is quite a complicated topic. Then I'll give you some of my thoughts on the data mesh and how it compares to other data management strategies. And then finally, we'll do a quick summary. So first of all, what is a data mesh? So this description I took from Zhamak Dehghani's data mesh book, which I'll talk about later. Zhamak Dehghani was also the person that came up with the data mesh concept as well. So she says that the data mesh is a decentralized social technical approach to share, access, and manage analytical data in complex and large-scale environments within or across organizations. Data mesh is a new approach in sourcing, managing, and accessing data for our analytical use cases at scale. I'm going to try and go through this as simple as possible and what a data mesh is. But if you'd like a technical deep dive into it, then this blog post, which was done by Zhamak Dehghani on Martin Fowler's website, is a really good. Well, it's not quite a blog post; it's more of an article, but I think that's worth reading. And I've used some of the content from there in this presentation. And also the data mesh book, which was also done by Zhamak Dehghani, is a really worthwhile read. And particularly at the start as well, before the book starts, they give you what they call a prologue, which is like an example of a company that implements the data mesh. It's a fictional company, but it's a really good example of how you can implement a data mesh at some organizations. So again, what is a data mesh? So the data mesh is built on 4 principles, and I'll go into a bit more details on these in some further slides, but just an overview. So it works off a decentralized domain ownership of data. It also works with data as a product, and there's also self-serve data infrastructure as a platform, and then federated computational governance. The aim of the data mesh is to get data from scale at complex and large scale organizations, and it hopes to achieve the below outcomes. So with a data mesh, it allows you to respond gracefully to change. It gives you agility in the face of growth, and also aims to increase the ratio of value from data to investment. Now, the data mesh is a big shift away from existing data management approaches, such as the Data Lakehouse. And this diagram here, or this image that I've taken from Zhamak Dehghani's data mesh book, I think is quite a good pictorial representation. So at the top here, as we mentioned, in like the existing data management strategies, you've got centralized ownership over here, whereas with a data mesh, you're looking more at this decentralized domain ownership. In existing data management strategies, you've got like a more of a monolithic approach where your data sources come into sort of one big platform. Whereas with the data mesh, it's a lot more distributed with lots of different domain teams looking after their own data. And technically, you've got data byproducts of a code, and with the data mesh, it's moving more to data and code as one single unit. Operationally, you've got generally you would have like top-down governance across data and people, whereas with the data mesh, it's more federated. And then from a principal point of view, data is usually an asset to collect, whereas the way the mesh looks at it is it looks at it as a product to share and connect. And infrastructure as well is that generally there's quite a fragmented platform between analytical and operational data, whereas the data mesh aims to create a more integrated platform with that. So the data mesh embraces the data realities of organizations today. It was created due to the perceived limitations of today's data solutions. And the main macro drivers for the creation of the data mesh, which has also again been taken from the data mesh book, is that the great expectations of data. So we've now got a diverse and wide applications of ML and analytics. There's also a great divide of data, and complexity has risen from fragmentation of operational and analytical data. And also the scale. There's large scale data source proliferation. And I think a lot of us can probably, understand this one. Business complexity and volatility. We seem to be in, continuous change, and the growth of businesses. And then this is quite an important one, I think, is there's a discord between data investments and returns. And a lot of what the data mesh is saying is that there's a lot of expensive data solutions out there, but they're lacking the impact they hoped for. So just to give you some more details on the principles. So the decentralized domain ownership of data. And what that means is that decentralizing the ownership of analytical data to the business domain that's closest to the data, either the source of the data or its main consumers. You separate out this analytical data logically and based on the business domain it represents, and manage the life cycle of domain-oriented data independently. So what it means by this point is that if you've got someone that's, say, the main consumer of your customer data, it might be that you then assign ownership to that particular business domain because they're the ones that use it the most, and they're the ones that will kind of, be the best stewards of that data. And then what they can do is once they're in a position, they can then start sharing that with these other decentralized teams. Data as a product. So this domain-oriented data is then shared as a product directly with data analysts, data scientists, etc. A data product provides a set of explicitly defined and easy to use data sharing contracts. And what that kind of means is that if we use like the customer example again, is that this domain team can share that product with other data analysts and data scientists from different teams. And they'd also create some sort of contract, which would be assigned by, which might be set up by like this federated governance team to say things like, this data will be accurate, complete, and things like that. And then each data product is autonomous, and its lifecycle and model are managed independently of others. The self-serve data infrastructure is a platform. So self-serve data platform services that empower the domains cross-functional teams to share the data. The platform services are centered around removing friction from end-to-end journey of data sharing from source to consumption. So what this basically means is that if you've got a business domain that wants to start creating and managing a particular data set, you want to make that as easy as possible and essentially like self-serve so that they can spin up the appropriate infrastructure and things that they need in order to be able to do what they need with the data and be able to share that with the rest of the domains. And then finally, federated computational governance. So data governance operating model based on federated decision-making and accountability structure with a team composed of domain representatives, data platform and subject matter experts. The operating model creates an incentive and accountability structure that balances the autonomy and agility of domains with the global interoperability of the mesh. And then finally, just to reiterate with these principles, why these principles have been chosen. And so for the domain-oriented decentralized data ownership, and that's so that the ecosystem creating and consuming data can scale out as the number of sources of data, number of use cases, and diversity of access models to the data increases. You can simply increase the autonomous nodes on the mesh. Data as a product, so that data users can easily discover, understand, and securely use high quality data with a delightful experience. Data that is distributed across many domains. And self-serve data infrastructure is a platform so that the domain teams can create and consume data products autonomously using the platform abstractions, hiding the complexity of building, executing, and maintaining secure and interoperable data products. And then finally, federated computational governance, so that data users can get value from aggregation and correlation of independent data products. The mesh is behaving as an ecosystem following a global interoperability standards that are baked computationally into the platform. And this was taken directly from the blog post that I mentioned earlier, that's on the Martin Fowler website. So just to give you an image that represents what a data mesh is, just to go through the principles there. So this bottom bit here represents your kind of your self-serve data platform. So the appropriate domains can come in here and spin up or create the appropriate infrastructure that they need. Over here, you've got your domain-oriented data and compute. So this is emphasizing that you've got your domain teams here that are creating and owning that data. And then your data product over here. So you're sharing, these particular shapes here represent like the data as a product. And as you can see, this is all being shared between the different domains that are creating these products. And then over the top of that, you've got your federated computational governance that will, the policies that feed into the various different products. So when you compare the data mesh to the data lakehouse, as you can see, it's a very different approach. So just recapping the lakehouse again, you've obviously got a bit of a simple structure. You've got your operational data sources come from here, and then you've got your centralized data lakehouse where all of your data will move into this raw area or the bronze area, and then move from silver into gold. And then all your analytics will be done from this gold area. Whereas the data mesh doesn't have that structure at all. All your data sits in these different products and it can all be linked together. Personally, I think I mentioned it at the start that I prefer this approach, the data lakehouse approach. I think this is the correct approach for most people. But I can certainly see how there are some benefits to using this type of domain-oriented ownership and decentralizing things. So I can see some scenarios where some of these products can, feed into the data lakehouse, whether they feed in at that raw area or whether they even, get combined with the gold layer further down here to be used in the analytical solutions. I think there's probably a few different ways to do it. So even though I think the lakehouse is the right approach, I do see that there's some really interesting concepts in here. So finally, my thoughts on this, and just to reiterate, these are my thoughts completely. Feel free to agree or disagree with them, and I'm sure my thoughts will evolve as we progress as well. So first of all, to implement a data mesh effectively is going to require a huge amount of work and a real big cultural shift in the way you think about data. I think it'll be very complex from a technical and an organizational point of view. And I think that coordinating the mesh will be extremely challenging for most people. Personally, I would argue that this time and money should be spent on improving your data lakehouse. And most organizations will be better served if they implement this centralized approach. And I believe that some of the drivers behind creating the mesh approach could be solved by creating an effective lakehouse where you can bring in new data sources quickly. As things stand, I believe that there are very few organizations that can build a mesh effectively. As I mentioned, the Data Mesh book prologue gives a really great example of a music sharing company where it could potentially work well. But I personally believe that this is probably an edge case. One of the big challenges for me would be getting the appropriate technical skill levels in each of the decentralized domains. This is quite hard to do now, even with centralized teams. So I think it would be even more challenging to do that across all these different domains. I also think that domain ownership of data would be very difficult to manage. I think most of the domains will focus on data for their products and will be under pressure to deliver features to the product rather than prioritizing data management tasks. I don't expect the data mesh to be what most organizations implement, and I expect a lot more organizations to implement a lakehouse. I think the data mesh provides us with some really interesting concepts to think about. And I believe we can take some of these principles and apply it to our existing data management solutions. Personally, I believe a hybrid approach is likely to pick up some more traction over the next few years in complex organizations. So how I see this, I sort of explained this a little bit on the previous slide, but I think you'll see a data lakehouse approach with some of the mesh principles that we talked about sprinkled in. Also, centralized data teams often have huge backlogs of work to complete, so it could be possible to leverage some of these mesh principles to help remove some of these bottlenecks. And finally, just a few case studies of companies that seem to be implementing a data mesh. Worthwhile giving those a read. So finally, to summarize, we're still in the innovator early adopter phase of the data mesh, so we'll likely see enhancements as we progress. As I mentioned, I still believe that a data lakehouse that is managed by a centrals team is still the best data management approach. If a data lakehouse is not currently offering the expected ROI, then I believe you should investigate why and make improvements rather than deciding to go in a completely different direction. Implementing some elements of data mesh into your data lakehouse using a hybrid approach will be beneficial in some scenarios. I believe that if you have some decentralized teams that are currently creating data silos, then you could use some of the mesh principles to allow them to take domain ownership of the data and share this data as a product and use it in the data lakehouse. I'm really interested to see how this develops in the future, and if we start to see more organizations either fully adopting a data mesh or at least taking some of the approaches and combining it with existing approaches like data lakehouses. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you all enjoyed that. And please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this. And if you've got any questions or comments, then add them to the space below. Thank you very much.